Okay, good. I just said it in the Discord. I'm taking attendance today. I have my notepad. I see Flynn here. I see Punk here. Mohas, Toby Moore. Okay, this is good. Oh, Super's arrived. All right. I'm sure I'm sure Y20 or Hypergrav is gonna roll into class 15 minutes late. Yo, I hope y'all. Yo, what am I doing here? I've got my fancy Christmas sweater, guys. Yo, it's the season. We're here for class, right? I have taken attendance. I see a bunch of you are here. Some of you are still late for class. And tisk tisk. Today, we're doing some social seances. That's right. I am the Professor Medium, and I will perform seance today. Seance? There are issues when it comes to the fighting game discourse, right? I think we can all say it's safe to say there are issues with the fighting game discourse. I got to thinking about why this might be. And the thing that kind of illuminated all this for me when I first realized it was that I was in the process of writing an article about competition and accessibility tools and things like that. And what we value in terms of competitive esports, basically, right? Or various competitive endeavors. Like the linchpin of this for me was the Classic Tetris World Championships, and it kind of blew up several years ago. And one of the first years that it really blew up and caught some mainstream attention was when a young player by the name of Joseph Saley showed up and started dominating. Now, I'm gonna give you a little bit of background on competitive Classic Tetris, right? So, there's a couple ways that you can like move the pieces in Classic Tetris. And so there's what's known as DAS, which is delayed auto shift, and then there's hyper tapping, right? And so Joseph Saley was this young kid who used hyper tapping, which requires like an insane APM. Like the number of button presses that you have to press per second to achieve hyper tapping when moving the pieces in Tetris is wild. Delayed auto shift is not as fast, but is way easier to do consistently. So usually in Classic Tetris, the best players traditionally were the ones who were excellent at DAS, at maintaining DAS, and the whole delayed auto shift. So when like you probably played Tetris, and like when you play Tetris, a piece drops down and you hold left, and it moves one space, and then it holds for a second, and then it goes like tick 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 tick, and it flies to the other end of the screen. So that's auto shift is what that is. Is like you hold it, and then it locks in. It's like you want me to automatically shift. So you can actually carry over that shift. So you do a delay and you move, and then when the next piece drops, if you time your press correctly, you'll actually avoid the delay, and you'll automatically be at top speed, moving either right or left. Which at higher levels of Tetris is super important because it means that you can actually place your pieces higher up. Because when your piece is falling so fast, you have to move it quicker. So hyper tapping, like I said, you mash away. What happens in this Classic Tetris World Championship? Joseph Saley wins using hyper tapping. And then over the next couple years, there's this like influx of super young players who use hyper tapping as the main technique, and they start dominating the scene. But after Joseph Saley won, I was like, man, that must kill your hands. To play on an NES controller and to mash at like 180 hertz or whatever the fuck it is that you have to mash at. Turns out Joseph Saley was experiencing hand problems later on. So I asked the question to the Classic Tetris World Championship folks. Doesn't it make sense to allow for something like a hitbox or an alternative control method that would let players not have to kill their hands to play the game? And for the sake of competitive integrity in the CTWC rule set, you have to use OEM controllers or select approved controllers, which means NES controllers. You got to use an NES controller, and you got to kill your hands to do these techniques that you need to win in this fucking game. So it's the intersection of competitive play and accessibility, right? And this all came down to, I had this whole theory crafted that the FGC was unique in the fact that we have solved this problem. We look at controllers and we embrace them, right? Custom arcade sticks, pads, fucking Guitar Hero controllers, whatever the case may be. People play on everything in the fighting game community, right? So I had this idea that, look, what we value in the FGC is different than what is valued in Tetris or these other esports that don't allow some of these accessibility tools or other controller options, right? And then what happens? I'm in the middle of writing this article. the leverless controller debate and discourse blows the heck up in the FGC. No, it's a cheat box. And all of a sudden, everything that I've said about this is what the discourse is about, right? This is what we value. I was wrong about it, right? And it got me thinking about just what the hell are our values anyways, right? And this is where we get into the social science aspect of it. Off the back of all this, seeing that I was very clearly wrong about this, right? I started applying this to all the different bits of fighting game discourse that we've had, right? So this is what I figured. FGC discourse falls apart when our unstated personal and cultural values are out of alignment, right? This is it. This is the hitbox/cheatbox discussion in a nutshell. This is the PC versus consoles. This is online versus offline competition, hardware versus emulation, right? What's better, Fightcade or a modern collection? Your answer to all these questions are going to depend on your values. And so I had this whole idea with my Tetris article and my Leverless article there. This discourse was stemmed from our set of values. But it turns out that all the poor discourse around that, it stems from the above stated premise. If our personal values were aligned, we wouldn't have a problem with this. If our cultural values were aligned, we wouldn't have a problem with this. And I'm using a bunch of words here that we're going to need to define. I want to talk a little bit about values, and value systems. Now, I'm going to be saying the word values a whole heck ton tonight, folks. But this is important. We need to have an actual proper set of definitions and terms that we're working from to figure out what the hell the problem actually is, right? So this is what I want to go through today and figure out, is this true? Does the FGC discourse fall apart when our unstated personal and cultural values are out of alignment? Is this the source of all the fucking problems that we have when we talk online, right? So values in our value systems, right? In the realm of ethics, values are preferences about actions and their outcomes. It is also the degree of importance that we place on these actions and objects. This is probably the first point of contention. There's a difference between the things that you place value on and your values. There are capital V values, which are way more esoteric in nature. You might have capital V values, which are like empathy, integrity is another one. Loyalty is one of your capital V values. It's not the thing, right? So you might value your hitbox. You hear this a lot, right? I value my hitbox. But hitbox isn't a value. It's a thing that you've assigned importance to because of your set of values. So you might value the accessibility that's provided by your hitbox. But your hitbox isn't a value. It is something that you value. This is, I think, where a lot of stuff falls apart. Where you look at the leverless discussion, and people are talking about, oh, you're not playing the game on an arcade stick. So you're not playing the game the way it was intended. And people are thinking that the value in this proposition is the arcade stick. And that you using something that's not that is an affront, right? Or a poor choice, right? It's not the arcade stick. It's what you're doing with it, right? And so we have to look at what our actual capital V values are when we start asking these questions and we have these conversations. If I value accessibility, I might value my hitbox more, which would lead me to the side of the conversation that says we should allow leverless controllers. Now, on the other end of it, you might have someone that says, I value, capital V value, competitive integrity and history. Let's say those are two of their primary values. So they see the importance of competitive integrity and be like, everyone has to play in the same level playing field, and they see history. And they're like, the importance of the history of our community and the way we played these games combined means that leverless controllers should be banned. And what's happening right here, this discussion, when someone looks at their capital V values and the way that they interact, that is your value system. That is your belief structure. And all of this informs the way that you react to the world and the way that you react to these conversations. This is what represents the way you think the world ought to be. And this is it. When people are having a conversation, when the FGC discourse happens, it's supposed to be about expressing our values. But people often talk instead about the thing they value. What's another good example of this? Another great example of this is online tournaments. Let's look at how someone's value system and how they structure their various values might impact their appreciation or the amount of importance, the lowercase v value they place on weeklies. So maybe you think that you say to yourself, hey, offline, in-person events, those are the best way to play fighting games, right? You say, I value my locals. Let's see our value system in action, right? I value my locals. The local, that is the object that has like imparted value. That is the object that has imparted values thanks to our capital V values. And those capital V values, what makes you think? Community, discovery, competitive integrity, right? Those are like big conceptual things that you would use to like determine how you react in a situation, what you think about a thing. So look, you value your locals, right? Because you like community, you like discovery, and you value competitive integrity. So obviously, competitive integrity, best place to get together, offline, no same hardware being used, same spot, same environment, right? That like levels a playing field, creates a sense of competitive integrity. Discovery, locals are the best place where you can get together with people who you know and you don't know, who are playing a whole bunch of stuff that you might not be experienced, or maybe playing them in ways that you don't experience them. So you get to discover that stuff, all with your community, right? So if those are like your high level primary values that barely ever change, then you're gonna value your locals a whole hell of a lot. So you get this shared space to collaborate and learn. Attending your locals allows you to live up to that. So this is your whole value system at work, where you look at all these things and you say yes, no. And so for some people, maybe one of your primary values is actually approachability and accessibility. And that competitive integrity is maybe ranked a little bit lower, right? So if that's the case, then you might say, hey, online events, great. That means that there's no regional barrier. People who can't make it out to physical places can play now, even if it's online, even if they use Wi-Fi, right? You start getting these things where if you appreciate and value, capital V value, these things more, that's going to trickle down into the things that you do, the objects that you appreciate, and how you react when you talk about them. So when you say, hey, I won this online local, and someone says, yeah, I lost in that tournament, and it's fucking bullshit because it's only online and that doesn't count, that's a conflict of values, right? And there is this presumption, right? So big issue number one. There is this presumption that wider cultural values, right? We've been talking about personal values here. Wider cultural values in the FGC must be that of every member. And you see this blow up all the time. Smash isn't a fighting game. Why the fuck would Smash not be a fighting game, right? There are wider cultural values and personal values at play, right? There's a reason that people look at Smash and the situation with like timing out and laming out and stuff like that, saying that that's an illegitimate way to play. Smash community, there's been a blow up of that. The FGC looks at that and is like, that's crazy. Like timer scams, timing out, playing for that, playing defensive in lieu of the timer is a thing that we do. And our competitive values are rated higher than the entertainment values of Smash players. Smash players are like, this is a boring way to play the game, so we don't want it. So they will make rules against it. Their culture will enforce rules based on what the wider cultural values are, right? So like most people in the Smash community would prefer a not lame game, and so they actually make tournament rule sets that enforce that. That's all their values right there, right? Right? And so like think of how many conversations break down because of this. An analogous thing happened in the heavy metal scene when drop D tuning started to become a thing. That's interesting. I do recall that. So yeah, pros call it scrubby. And that's exactly it. Pros call it scrubby. This is one of the jobs of a of a cultural value system. Cultural value systems enforce their values on the members under its umbrella. That's one of the things it does. One of the things our personal value systems do is actually help us assess and reassess. It helps us look at a situation and tells us what's an appropriate way to react. It helps us look at a thing and say, is this thing important, right? And it also helps us look at our own value system and say, is this working properly? It's supposed to be a self-correcting thing, right? But the way that cultural value systems work is that they actually reinforce their cultures and exert their powers through norms. Reinforce and exert cultural power via norms. Now, what the hell's a norm? Perfect example, American culture, right? The United States, patriotism is one of the core American values, one of the core cultural values of the United States of America. If that's one of the core cultural values, their norm would be flying an American flag on your property. And the object of value would be the flag itself, right? So you have the values of patriotism, which tell you that the norm of flying a flag is good, and that reinforces those values and exerts them on the wider populace, right? And the thing that you've assigned lowercase v value to is the flag itself. So all these things are connected. Fighting game community people, this is what we're talking about, right? How does this relate to the fucking fighting game community? We value a broad representation of players, right? Wide representation is an important value to the fighting game community. Our norm to enforce that is to host open bracket tournaments. The object would be Frosty Faustings, right? We value Frosty Faustings in part because it is an open bracket tournament that everyone can attend to that caters to the community. And the reason that's important is because we value a broad representation of players. So having the most players be able to access a tournament, that's important. So values trickle down to norms, trickle down to the object itself. But all of this shit is where the second big issue comes into play. So big conflict number 2, cultural and individual values don't match, right? And so what happens? We were just talking about this. They don't match. Drop D tuning, right? That's scrubby, dude. And lo and behold, what happens? Oh, you want 1-button specials? You must be scrubby. You want a macro for 3 punches and 3 kicks? Just learn to hit the buttons at the same time. Oh, damn, right? No, that top player lost in a tournament. God damn, it must have been the lag on the monitor. Must have been, right? And it's like, whatever it is, you get shamed into it. This is the cultural value system imposing their values on you and punishing you if you step out of line, right? So running an online tournament, that's all well and good, but anybody have any problem with this? Oh yeah, that's not legitimate, right? Oh yeah, see, beautiful. And the thing about drop D tuning, it didn't just make something easier. It made something extra possible by extending the range of the instrument. And this is it, where this is like gatekeeping attitudes often stem from the thing that they value being their notoriety, being their expertise, right? And it's more important for them to maintain their expertise than it is to have, say, an aesthetically pleasing sound, a broader representation of sound, a more efficient use of a tool, right? And like people who want efficiency might say, hey, drop detuning, great, expands the range. That is it. And there's a core conflict there where people are just butting heads and they don't realize that they're talking about a different actual thing. Yeah, Flynn's saying, I think a lot of people feel like they're special and cool because they can do a thing other people can't. And when things become easier for other people to do that same thing, it somehow devalues them being able to do the cool thing that made them special. Precisely. How do we start this off? FGC discourse falls apart where our unstated personal and cultural values are out of alignment, right? People start talking about leverless controllers, and one of them is talking about, say, the value of its history, while the other is talking about the value of its utility, and they can't figure out why they're disagreeing, right? Like, that's a big problem that like blows up our ability to have like rational and important conversations in the fighting game community. If our poor discourse stems from there, and our big problems is that there's this presumption of a wider cultural value in the fighting game community that applies to everyone that doesn't really exist, and so we're talking past each other. And then you have these main individual and larger cultural values that are clashing. this is kind of the conclusion that I'm coming to today. I think that explains why the breakdown is happening. But why is it happening so often? I think we've all seen the FGC discourse cycle get shorter and faster and generally more angry as time has gone on. Why is it that it used to be every 6 to 8 months, I would hear about approachable fighting game design, or I would hear about a leverless controller issue, or I would hear the discourse about whether or not we should pay our TOs, right? Or how maybe prize pools are too small in the FGC. This shit used to come around every 8 months or so. And then it was every 6 months. And then, COVID hit and it was every 4 months. And now it seems like it's every month. We are back in another one of these cycles. Only a few weeks goes by before we're talking about one-button specials and modern controls and paying our TOs and all of this nonsense. Why? Why is it getting quicker? Why is it getting louder? Why is it getting more angry? My friends, the FGC is currently experiencing a significant cultural shift where our old cultural values are being challenged and replaced by new ones, right? And where are these new ones coming from, right? It's a combination of things. It's coming from COVID. Like, seriously, COVID is one of them. The drive away from individual, in-person events was huge. This was coupled with an explosion in rollback-enabled games, where suddenly a whole bunch more games were able to actually be competitively viable online and over wider distances. This has brought so many new people into the fighting game community. So the larger, the cultural value system of the FGC, the wider FGC, is no longer able to influence or exert its power in a way that keeps these minority voices down, that keeps down the people who are like, accessibility and approachability is more important than competitive integrity or history or purity of the game or whatever the case may be, and is not able to beat down those voices in the way that it used to be, right? Scrub quotes has gone from the thing that we all used to laugh at to the thing that we now laugh at for that's not a bad take. Why is that a scrub quote, right? That shift alone is indicative of this larger cultural shift that's happening in the fighting game community right now. And this is fair, Punk, right? You might not be privy to a lot of this FGC discourse stuff, but if you've hung out on FGC Twitter for long enough, you'll start seeing it pop up. And like I said, I'm pretty tuned into this stuff, so when I see it come around every month, I'm like, listen, this is an escalation in terms of frequency and all that shit. Why is this discrepancy and why is this divide growing wider and wider? It's because entrenched voices, the traditional ones and the new people who have come into the scene are clashing, right? It's that is the fundamental divide, right? Yeah, you can avoid it a lot, Punk, based on the things that you value: community, discovery, and then competitive nature, right? And so there are degrees. There are primary values which are pretty much unchanging, right? Things like empathy, things like equity. Those things are going to be pretty hard to change. But there are secondary values which are much more malleable and are much more prone to change, right? And so what's happening right here is that we have the former primary values of the FGC were things like history, purity of the game, competitive integrity, and that competitive integrity was tied to a form. And that form, that object, was the arcade machine, right? We saw this divide happen when EVO went from arcade machines to consoles. We saw this happen when consoles took over entirely and a lot of the people went online. And those 09ers who play on Xbox Live, they don't really count, right? And it's all of a sudden we have a bunch of players who are coming out of that online scene and are dominating in real world settings. And then all of a sudden it was well, maybe it's not such a illegitimate thing, right? There has been a slow and sure cultural shift as time has gone on, but I think this is we are coming to a head where the old generation and those who think primarily like them and value the things that they do are now coming in and hitting a new generation of players and community members who have fundamentally different values and would rather see things like discovery and beauty, right? And efficiency and approachability and accessibility. Those things matter way more important than the history. So Why do I care if I'm playing on an arcade stick or a leverless or a pad, or if I'm playing on emulation, or if it's modded with training mode features, right? Like, it's way more important that more people are playing, more people are able to play comfortably and safely, right? Like, these things are happening. And it's the same reason you see the, like, some of the old school, more like libertarian, right-leaning FGC groups struggle with a very open and equity-minded group of players who are coming in. I see the young kids coming into this fucking community, and the kids are all right. They're doing all right, man. They've got some good ideas on them, and they have some fucking proper values, and I think they're making better communities than what I have often experienced. I still love the FGC communities that I grew up in, and that I value those things a whole heck ton, lowercase v, remember. My values have also changed, capital V, have also changed over the years. And I identify way more with some of these younger kids and the scenes that they're building than some of the older gatekeepy ones who are tied to this, like, sense of purity and sense of history that may not be as valuable as we actually used to think it was, right? So my whole value system is changing, and the cultural value system of the FGC is now changing, and this is why these explosions are happening. But what do we do? So this is bringing up, like, I don't want to be the guy who's like, here's a problem, we have 0 solutions. What are we gonna do? How do we fix this? Or at least make it better? Culture? I don't fucking know. I'm not actually an ethicist. No. Discourse is like that, designed to generate opinions. All it takes a few people who don't respect those with different views to turn it into a shit show. See, and like, that's it. For me, like, I would disagree that that's the point of it. Like, for me, legitimately, the point of discourse is not discourse TM, like the actual discourse, is to be able to, hear another's opinion. And and that's me, right? Yeah, absolutely. That's me. But I mean, fair. Like, I guess that's important, that if someone is using discourse TM as a tool for engagement on Twitter, there is no coming back from that. There actually is no solution to that. I don't necessarily think that's what the majority of the interactions are, right? Like, I think people have really strongly held beliefs, and when they go to tweet on Twitter, they are like, yo, this is my fucking primary belief. It's getting thrown out there. I have done no fucking analysis. Congratulations, right? And people throw a couple of those at each other, and like, we need to kind of diffuse that situation, right? I mean, yeah, a bad actor is a bad actor. And I think that's, we can safely ignore bad actors in terms of just like, that shit's gonna happen, and focus on the ones where you're like, no, I think this is like more of a miscommunication and a misalignment. But I think if we're looking through here, we have a few things we can do, right? First and foremost, you can understand your individual value systems and avoid adding to the noise right off the bat, right? Just like, stop before tweeting and think about why you said this, and maybe was it an overreaction, or maybe am I even thinking about the same thing the other person is talking about? If you're thinking about the historic value of the fighting game community and the tools we use, and someone else is talking about efficiency and accessibility, maybe don't jump down their throats because you're mad that they're talking about a different thing, right? Like, use this to self-adjust and make sure that it's not a noisy conversation to begin with. And if you can recognize that, you can kind of extend a hand to the other person to make sure they have assessed their own values in the conversation. Reduce the noise. That's what this is all about. And some shit that has absolutely nothing to do with people and randoms. Yeah. Some shit has nothing to do with anyone, and random strangers decide it's time to chime in for absolutely no reason, right? And that's adding noise to the conversation. That's exactly it. So use these first two, right? It's like, don't be the one jumping in and adding more noise. And if you do it in a way that is trying to clear the signal. Yeah, Toby's seen hundreds of positive interactions, but those are like a resolution in and of themselves. And that's it. Good interactions resolve themselves without blowups, and a lot of people don't even see them, right? And this is it. Maybe like, this is what we could do. Like, doing this, engaging in these kinds of conversations can help push that cultural shift that's happening in the fighting game community, where it's like, if more of our conversations end without a fucking internet blow up, then I think we're getting closer to crossing the threshold. Understand our own value systems, avoid it adding to the noise, extend a hand across the aisle, make sure that they are also understanding what their fucking values are. I think this is really the resolution that we're going to have. Either one, the old cultural values are going to exert their force and prevent a larger shift, meaning we will repeat this cycle. Or two, we're going to use some of these tools, and with a better understanding of what is actually fucking important and people talking on the same page, we're going to be able to bridge some of the cultural gaps that we currently have. Those are going to be our two outcomes, right? And with a new set of community members coming in with a much more rounded understanding of what their values are and a broader set of values, that change is going to happen, right? And it's about if enough subcultures, if enough places like the Digital Basement, if enough places like Fraud Crew and ACP start popping up, once they are no longer the minority voice, it's kind of hard for the wider scene to ignore us. Those are the ones that came together. It's the same thing where you saw Evo. It's all about Evo. Evo kind of fucking shit the bed. And all of a sudden it was, hey, it's all about CEO and Combo Breaker. And right? So like we shifted what our priorities were and what our value was in terms of history, and we've accepted new tournament organizers, creating new standards, creating new sense of community, creating events which focus on community in a way that they never used to. Evo being the more corporate-oriented, this is a convention, and Combo Breaker being always more of the, this is us coming together enjoying a concert. It wasn't, right? Like, Evo was the concert promoter, Combo Breaker was the people attending the concert. Right? And that was a shift that has happened, and we can continue to make that shift happen so that things like approachability, things like accessibility, things like equity and broader representation in our scene, that those things will become primary values for enough of the community that it's going to start reflecting in all of the norms and all of the events that we host and all of the objects of ethical value that we come across. Yeah, the sheer amount of games being played has increased astronomically too, so values have shifted just based on that increase. Absolutely. You look at the explosion where, think of like okay, I mean, I think when I started doing the niche fighter thing, I had to explain to people what niche was. I now see people just using the term niche fighter outside of any other context. That is the kind of thing that is starting to permeate, in part because you're right, the wider cultural values are starting to shift. We used to look at all of those, if it wasn't Capcom. Dude, do you remember those days? Do you remember the days of going to a weekly and everyone being like, oh, you're here for Street Fighter. You're here for Marvel, right? No, I'm here for BlazBlue. I'm here for Soul Calibur or Tekken Tag 2, right? Oh, why would you do that? Go play a real game. Go play the game that people actually care about, right? And that was fucking the other major franchises. Like, you were looked down upon in like 2010 if you went to play anime games, because why the fuck wouldn't you just play Street Fighter? And it's like, that's wild. But now you look at it and people go to weeklies and people see something new and they say, ooh, what's that? Right? That shift is a fundamental cultural shift that has been happening in the fighting game community over the last 10 years. And it shouldn't be discounted. It absolutely should not be discounted because it is very important. Tekken players only play Tekken. NRS players only play NRS games, right? Like, that shit was rampant. And like, I think it's the like, Smash isn't a fighting game problem, right? Where like everyone's like, oh no, we don't value them and whatever they do. It's so different and wonky that that's not really a fighting game, right? And honestly, that attitude permeated pretty much every scene that was not your main competitive scene, right? Like, if your weekly was primarily Street Fighter, it was the Capcom weekly. Oh yeah, that's right, yeah. If more people cared about those other games now, and since they've been around just as long as something like Street Fighter 2, it would give them the same kind of clout that the SF2 OGs have. And it's not, right? And it's like, I look at the niche fighting game scene, and there are some old heads in there, don't get me wrong, but it's a lot of young kids. It's a lot of young kids looking at games in a way that a lot of the fighting game community refused to look at these games. There is the shit that we found in Eternal Champions CD. There is no reason that shouldn't have been discovered before me, Punk, and Flynn were like, let's get obsessive about this, right? Shoutouts to Punk for that, by the way. Like, they brought it to us and were like, and this is it, right? Whereas like Punk saw something in it based on their set of values that made them say there's potential here. There is lowercase v value in ECCD, and we should look at it. And like 5 years ago, I probably would have brushed them off. And when they brought that to me, I was like, huh, maybe I'm missing something. And that was actually one of the points where I consciously recognized my value system changing, right? Where I actually noticed it going from I prize a larger player base, which can be more competitive, I replace that with the idea of discovery and the idea of technical importance and unique systems, right? And like those things started becoming more important to me, so I was able to look at ECCD in a way that let us find these great things. And yeah, Toby, that's kind of why you like those lesser known games, right? The community isn't there to argue. You get to just blaze the trail. Yeah, super. And now stuff like Martial Champions, an old forgotten 1993 Street Fighter ripoff, quote unquote, getting some recognition and praise that never had before, right? And that's it. And it's like, it was so easy to look at those games, especially in the heyday of Street Fighter, and say, why value that? Why do we impart importance onto that? And that means we didn't look at them. And that means we missed a whole bunch of great stuff. People talk about the dead era of fighting games, and it's actually the era of lack of imagination, where the fighting game community had a serious lack of imagination in terms of what was important and interesting. And instead of exploring the numerous games that were available to them at the time, they said fighting games are dead. Once again, I think it's because the capital V value that they have, that the FGC has prized most above all else, is history. And you see this with how self-referential our games are. You see this with the importance of archetypes. You see this with the legacy knowledge that is required to play fighting games. The FGC, instead of saying what might be more important, new and interesting ways to play these games, they said, oh, it's not like what it was. Guess it's not important. Oh, so that's kind of revisionist history, you think? Oh, no, this is cool. I'm glad. Feel free. Call me out on something. Fact is, if you weren't privy to importing or knew where to find these games or what they even were, it was a dead zone. Okay. I mean, there is definitely an issue where the timeline for the dead period and the timeline for the decline of arcades coincide. It was tougher to find arcade games in general, and I think that contributed to it. But what arcades we had were dominated with a handful of legacy titles, in part because that was like we fed our norms in terms of we need 7 Street Fighter cabs. Oh, we have 2 other games, but now that we can only have 2 cabs, you have 2 Street Fighter cabs. I think the community, based on the way we acted, kind of set that up. Okay, no, so that's interesting, right? So you're saying that try to get a copy of Arcana Heart for the PS2 during that era, but there were like 2 copies basically in anywhere in the state, right? Yeah, okay, that shit happens. Yeah, absolutely. Stores stopped carrying these kinds of games. They stopped being covered in magazines and in the press. Yeah, there was a general decline in because it was. I mean, like mid-90s fighting games, they hit a peak and then they were coming down from that. There was still a pretty broad selection there. So yes, you're absolutely right in terms of it got way more difficult to find any of it. But within the realm of what we had, people were ignoring a large majority of it, which I think made the lack of games feel even bigger than it was. There is a bubble that the fighting game community finds itself in, and in part, the death of the genre was self-inflicted and not as desperate as it made out to be. And then it's a struggle to find people to play. Yeah. Maybe that's an important distinction to make between, like, when you talk about the dead era, right? When you talk about the missing age of fighting games, right? And it's like, it's not that the games were missing. It's that the the locale was missing. As we lost arcades as a primary way to do it, and it was less of a cultural force, it was harder to find people to play with because you had to actively gather them outside of a communal gathering spot, right? And I think that's why one of the big explosions post Street Fighter 4 was in part because there was a large return. There was a cultural awareness increased, which led more people to hosting weeklies more consistently, which provided us with that space, and therefore more people entered, and that was kind of the boom era of like past '09 in Street Fighter 4. And so it was the inverse. The dead era was us losing not the games, but the space, and then was us regaining the space, and the games have always been there. Yeah, fighting games did really fail to adapt to the rising PC gaming market. That is absolutely it, right? There was, hey, maybe that's it. Did we value the location? Do we value the object of arcades too much to the point that we weren't prepared, both as developers and as a community, for a shift away from them? We were way more well equipped to deal with the shift away from locals when COVID hit. And I think that's why, instead of seeing a dead era, which is what you probably would think, right? You lose all your locals. Who's playing fighting games anymore? More people than ever because they're all playing online. We were equipped to deal with that. And our values have shifted enough that we're not seeing the same struggles as we did in the mid-2000s. No, and that's an interesting point, though, that fighting games were not well equipped to change to the new era of PC games. And yeah, super, right? The fact that you're struggling to even answer that question, what games released on PC between 2000 and 2016? Shit, when was Vanguard Princess released? 2014. Vanguard Princess is at least one of them that was released on PC between that era. And I think that's what you'll find, actually. A lot of the PC games were the doujin scene. It was the indie scene. It was the arena fighters and the platform fighters. I think that's where you will find those kinds of games. People love playing fighting games, says Toby. Why buy more fighting games if you just enjoy the one you have without competition? True. You need to want to see more of the world of fighting games or be hyper-competitive. It tends to be one or the other. These two groups have existed for a long time. Now there are new dynamics at play. Hopefully a little bit of what we've done here today, it will like give you a bit of a framework to look at these new dynamics and understand where someone's coming from. Why are they reacting in this way to these dynamics? Probably because of the things they value and their value structures. So like pick that apart a bit and maybe we'll understand a bit more, right? And it's like, and for everyone individually, like this is what I keep saying to people where I'm like, there's so many cool things about fighting games that you can go and find. Peer into your value system a little bit and try to figure out what it is that draws you to the various things. Someone said, someone joked on Twitter, I value big, disrespectful buttons that I could throw out there and that you will run into face first, we will trade, and I will still get a combo off of it, right? And I jokingly put in, I'm like, you value chaos. A little bit of truth to that, though. If you value a chaotic nature of gameplay with high risk, high reward, you might like big, dumb, disrespectful buttons in your fighting games. Right? And it's like, it's interesting and important, and you're probably going to find something that you didn't think you'd enjoy if you interrogate those things a little bit. And hey, I said this in a video I made a while ago too, right? We talk about how the larger fighting game devs weren't prepared from the shift away from an arcade-based fighting game into the PC world. Doujin and niche circles were equipped for that because they were already making them on PC and stuff like that, right? And our niche fighting game circles were well equipped for the move to online because a lot of those communities were already online communities. There was no local if you wanted to go and play TMNT tournament fighters, right? Like you might have a major event once or twice a year where a bunch of you would gather, but most of the community already existed online and had solutions to play online. So when it moved to the COVID era of we don't have weeklies, we don't have locals anymore, a lot of these scenes were just kind of like, well, no fucking problem. Let's boot up that Parsec server, right? Like, they were well equipped to handle that change. And so I think this is one of the reasons the niche fighting game scene is still around and still popping and in fact growing, is because they are so resilient and they are so set up for community. Sometimes you got to just be able to enjoy a game and that's enough. It doesn't need... I was talking about that where I'm like, I really liked the ranked queue in Breaker's collection. And it's something that I actually placed a bunch of value on, in part because, not because it was a ranked queue and I get ranking points and I get to pit myself in competition, but because it means I get fed a steady stream of competitors where I want to be able to play more people quicker. And a queue does that for me. It's like the fact that the rank queue is what's populated, great, right? But it's not the rank competition aspect that I'm valuing. It's I enjoy playing the game and I want to play more people. So I value that system to just feed me players, right? And yeah, and you could do that at the arcade too. That was one of the great things about the arcade, where I love the competitive aspects of it as well. But you can just walk in there and you never know. You might face someone who's literally never touched the game before and doesn't know what a Blanca is, or you might face someone who has Swordocchio down pat and is just gonna fucking body you. Like you never know, and you get a brand new experience every time, and you line up and boom, someone's there. Like that is important. That is valuable. It's true. Folks who haven't scared off their only opponent in an arcade might not understand. I remember I went to New York to visit Mrs. MKL's family years and years and years ago. We had a night free, and I was like, I'm going out. She's like, where the fuck are you going? And I'm like, I'm going to Chinatown Fair. I'm in New York City. I've got to go check out Chinatown Fair. And I went there, and there was one person on the Blaze Blue machine. And I walked up to there, and I put my money in, and I selected Noel Vermillion, and I fucking got a hit, and I gun looped his ass to death. And he stood up, and he said, why the fuck do I even bother playing this fucking game anymore? You assholes always come in here and do this whenever someone sits down on the cab, right? And he fucking left the venue, and no one played me in Blaze Blue for the rest of the night. It was so sad. I'm just like, I just want to play, man. I just want to play, and I want to show off my gun loops because look, I go pop, bang, bang, pop, and I'm like, it's just so much fun. Look, check this out. He's like, you've ruined my night, sir, and left the arcade. It was fucking beautiful, though. It was so good. All right, this concludes FGC Social Sciences 101. Or sorry, Social Seances. I hope, like I said, I genuinely hope that kind of gives people a framework to kind of look at the FGC discourse when it starts falling apart, or when you start talking to someone and you're just like, what the hell is wrong with you? And you kind of want to blow up on their ass. Maybe assess it a little bit and take a look and say, okay, we can tweak this conversation to have something a little bit more rewarding and productive. Hopefully some other people take a listen to this and check it out, and like, yeah, we can use these tools going forward to make it, because I think it's important. Like, these are important conversations that we should have in the fighting game community, and it's easy to just be like, the discourse, and ignore it, and then it gets worse, and that's no fun. So